I'd like to call on stage Jaideep Chanda, Victor Unit from 2 Yankee Echo on stage.
Morning everybody, can you hear me at the back? Today I'll be speaking on the basics of setting up your shack, and just if you can give me a heads up as to how many of you have got your licenses but are yet to set up your shack. Do we have anybody of that category? 1? Anybody else? 2? Wonderful. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Almost quite a few people. So this talk I have structured for people like you because I went through a bad phase myself. I made all sorts of mistakes. I'm sure you will make them as well. Some mistakes are required to be made. But at the same time, we will try and help you with information which I didn't have at that point in time. So setting up your shack, the basics. Okay, next please. So in my previous lecture, I had explained the evolution of this slide as to what all happens and the entire scope of ham radio as I interpret it. Next. And we had come across the approaches to the hobby. And whatever is in red was the question that you had to answer to yourself, what makes you happy? And whatever is below that are the various facets of ham radio. But it's not an exhaustive list, it's a very vast list. The photographs that you see on the right are the certificates and awards that my good friend VU2YYE Lakshman has been awarded. So the VU-CC is the Indian 100 Contacts Award, the DX-CC is the DX Century Club, WAC is Work All Continents, that's another very interesting award that the QRZ gives and various associations give. So this is part of what we call wallpaper collection. Next please. So the moment you get your license, the first thing you do is to make an email address. So you get a call sign, and normally people want to make a Gmail address or email address based on a call sign. So my call sign is VU2YYE@gmail.com. There's a lot of traffic related to ham radio, so it's best to have a separate call sign, separate email for that. You'll keep your personal email decluttered, and the next thing you do is to update your QRZ page. So QRZ.com. QRZ is the Q code for who's calling me or may I know your call sign or who's this. It's like that. And one of the next things that you do is you establish your QRZ page. I've got a screenshot of the QRZ page coming up. Ecolink, for the QRZ and the Ecolink, you need to upload your license, your national license, without which you can't get a QRZ call sign based page. But for SWLs, you can just register on the QRZ and you are able to access most of the details, but probably you can't post, so there are some restrictions like that. And then the very important decision you need to do is you need to decide whether you want to start on the VHF UHF route or you want to go into the big guns and go into the HF route right in the beginning. So that's an important decision to be made. Next. So this is the QRZ page, and there are two reasons why I am showing this, so that firstly you are familiar with what the QRZ page looks like, and next, what you see in the center, the black portion which says solar terrestrial data written in the middle of it, is exactly what Dr. K.J. Ramesh was talking about yesterday about you. He spoke about solar storms. He spoke about propagation, the effect of solar storms and propagation. As hams, we are directly affected by solar storms. And the data that you get for solar storms is available on the QRZ page right out here. So what you see on the top right, it says VHF conditions. Just point to the black VHF conditions. It says 6 meter is 50 megahertz is good, or 2 meters and this thing is closed. And bottom left, you will see the HF conditions. So 17 to 15 meters by day is good. It's good at night also, but 30 to 20 meters is poor in day and good at night. So these things matter. This is what's going to affect the functioning of your system. So there are many people, and I used to think the same as well, who think you buy a radio, you set up an antenna, you switch it on and it will work. No, that's not how nature works. Here you are playing with nature. Propagation is a huge thing. Line of sight, power, antenna alignment, antenna polarization, a whole lot of things. It's not like buying a mobile, putting a SIM card and speaking. The thrill, the fun, the skill, the art of ham radio comes about when you address these issues. Next please. So that's Lakshman, VU2YYE, and that's his daughter. She is also Oishi, and she just got a call sign, and I think within a week or 10 days she managed some 100 QSOs in a record time. But with a shack like that and a father like that, I'm not surprised. Yeah, next please. So now we come to how do you go about setting up your shack. It should read approaches to setting up your shack, not read. I was making this late last night. So what should our approach be when we start setting up our radio station? Next. Is it a home brew? Oblique a local rig approach? Is it that you want to straight away jump into making your own rig or buying a local rig? Right? It's not a bad option, but it's cheap, it works, but it's not the most effective option. Normally, unless you are very technically inclined and that gives you pleasure, I will not recommend this. Right? I would say you still go for a commercial rig, come on air, let that chaska of coming on air regularly and start getting that thrill, and then you move into the home brew activities. So, when I say home brew, it means you are making it yourself. When I say local brew, I am talking of things like in-kits, where you have a single band 40 meter QRP rig, low power rig, or maybe the BITX or even the SBTX I am counting as a local rig. When I say commercial rig, I am referring to the big four: Kenwood, ICOM, Yasu, and now we have a couple of more: Jaegu, Motorola, and so on. Next please. Yeah. So now we come to the full commercial approach. You are in that stage of life where at least you can afford a rig, you can indulge yourself. You don't upgrade your car, but you decide, okay, let the car remain, I'm going to buy a good rig or something like that. It's expensive, but in the long run, it may well be economical, because a lot of homebrewers tell me that we spend a lot of money building stuff, and then we maybe don't use it too much, or it doesn't come out perfectly, and for the local competitions we end up eventually buying a rig or something. So eventually, while initially this may feel it's expensive, but eventually it may become economical in that sense, in the long run. Next. Now, as far as antennas are concerned, it doesn't matter whether it's homebrew or commercial, it is a major investment in time and effort. I'm not talking about money. It's a major investment in time and effort, and it's worth the investment, because a poor rig or a fancy rig with a poor antenna is of no use, but a poor rig with a fantastic antenna will give you far greater dividends than it would do in the other case. So a lot of time and effort is worth spending on the antenna. Next please. So this is basically a compilation of the differences, relatively cheaper and very easy to start with, effective where repeaters have been installed, and is good for chasing birds, basically satellite work. The normal trajectory of equipment acquisition for a ham starts with a handy, right? And that's a VHF handy. HF of course is longer ranges, again with a caveat. It depends on the kind of antenna you have, the kind of power output you're looking at. It is relatively more expensive and slightly more difficult. The antennas are large. They have to be put on poles. Typically those poles need to be about 33 feet, or at least more than 33 feet above the ground level, and so on, for the wavelength issues. They are independent of repeaters, but this is the big boy. This is the big daddy. This is where you have maximum fun, because you can make international contacts from the word go. Variations in power and mode are there. In UHF, there's not much variety in that sense, essentially. Now just keep in mind, these are generalizations. For everything that I say, there is an exception. So don't turn around and tell me, sir, but you said this, however on ground it is this, you are probably right. But I am only giving generalizations. Next. VHF sets are concerned, they come in three categories: either handies, mobile stations, or base stations. Handies are typically 5 watts. Mobile stations, which you install in your car, or maybe you can keep it and use it as a base also, is about between 20-25 watts. And the base stations are up to 65-70 watts maximum. So they cost that much more in their variety. Repeaters definitely are preferred. They're easier to procure. The antennas are very easy. You have, for example, a handy, and this antenna which we are holding out here, we call it a rubber ducky. And what it basically has, it has a 2-meter length of wire coiled inside like a spring. So that's what gives it the compactness. And because it's flexible, we call it a rubber ducky. This is a very basic antenna. Then you can add to it the other antennas to come to that. It's a very decent starting point for novices. But it's less, the activity of VHF and UHF in India is very less, primarily because of the lower number of repeaters. So, as a policy, we need to increase the number of repeaters in India, increase the number of clubs, and then we can establish this network where people can really communicate with each other across distances. As far as base stations, HF is concerned, they are essentially base stations, but you do have QRP rates. Now, QRP stands for, it doesn't stand for anything, it's the Q code for low power. They look like oversized handies, and they have antennas, and that's another stream by itself where people try and reach out as far as possible using the lowest possible power output. So QRP operation is slightly more difficult technically, and it is considered a higher aspirational goal for hams to start working QRP. It is like trying to say that you tweak your car in such a way that the fuel efficiency goes up tremendously, but the range reduces, or the emission norms change or something like that. Now, setting up antennas, novices definitely will need a lot of help in setting up a HF station, primarily because of the antenna problems. You can't just buy a rig, switch it on, and expect you'll be able to talk to Finland or Norway. It takes time. It takes help, and that is where I will appeal to all the senior hams who are sitting here. Please reach out and help your people, the new people who are coming into the hobby, because it takes help. There is much more activity compared to VHF in HF, and of course a lot more international work. Next please. Next. So as I said, VHF, when I say VHF, UHF, you get radios which are VHF only, handies. You get handies which are UHF only. You get dual band handies. Typically, when you read the model number, it will have UV written on it. It basically means UHF, VHF. If it doesn't have UV in the name, for example, Lawfake UV5R, means it's a 5 watt handy and it is UHF and VHF. So when you are buying, many people have made this mistake. When you are buying, look for this word UV and read the specifications. The UHF band is also known as the 2-meter band, and the frequency is generally 144 to 146. So look for these kind of figures. Next please. The UHF band is known as the 70 centimeter band. That's the wavelength. So you need to look out for these kind of figures, and the frequency is 436 to 438 or something like that. And you have to look for these figures to figure out that it's a UHF VHF radio set. Because the wavelength is low, UHF is considered better suited for urban activities compared to the VHF. But this is again a generalization. Don't fall, go for it blindly. Next please. I just mentioned this. Next. So I showed you the rubber ducky. You also have what is known as the ground plane, the whip antenna, the tape antenna, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have what we call the Yagi Uda antenna, which is directional, and this is what you normally use for the satellite work. You also use this if you are far away from a repeater and you want to point and hit a repeater. A lot of people use this. It's very effective, very cheap, very easy to make. For less than about 500 rupees, you can fabricate a Yagi Uda or even a Jaipur or whatever and get very decent results very easily. Next please. Line of sight, as I mentioned, is the main criteria. Next. Next. So, what you need to buy? Preferably, if you are buying your first handy, make sure it is dual band. if you can get full duplex, that means receive and send at the same time, that will help you do satellite work if you want to. And if you are spending money, then might as well spend a little more money and buy a digital version. So you don't have to buy a separate handy for digital. Subsequently, in case you want to migrate to the digital world. Next. Coming on to HF. HF, currently I think commercially we have only available up to about 200 watts. At the lower end, you can get milliwatt QRP rigs also. You can decide what you want to take. Next. Yeah. Unlike VHF and UHF, rigs can be homemade. Cannot be homemade. VHF and UHF rigs, although there are some people who are homebrewing it, it is for certain reasons extremely difficult to homebrew a VHF rig or UHF rig. However, HF is very amenable to be homebrewed, and therefore we have a lot of activity in the homebrew world on the HF rigs. Next. It is more expensive, a bit cheaper, but time consuming, right? When I say expensive in terms of commercial, cheaper if you are going in for homebrew, a bit local, and it is time consuming and takes effort. Next. I have had a lot of frustration trying to set up my antennas. Thankfully, I had very good friends and very good elmers who spent a lot of time. 40 meter band antenna, a dipole. If you have somebody who is experienced with you, it can be done in about an hour. And if you try to do it yourself without experience, it can go into a week. Eventually you will get there, but I found it extremely frustrating. But the rewards are worth it. Next. Because the equipment is so expensive, because the equipment is very complex, proper earthing we've already discussed, and better power supply management is essential. So again, there were people like me who used to think, I've got a rig, now let's switch it on, and then somebody says, okay, but where's the power supply? So then you realize it's not just buying a rig, there's a lot more to it than before you even get on there. Next. Now this is will need help. Next. This is where the real fun is. Yesterday, Atul also said, this is the big daddy of it all. This is where you really have a lot of fun speaking to people from really, really far off places, and it's a thrill of its own type. Next. So a typical ham shack will have a 220 volt power supply. The moment you go to buy a power supply or you discuss power supply, the first question another ham will ask you, do you want a linear or a SLPS? Then you take out your phone and start googling what is the linear power supply, what is the SLPS power supply, if you're somebody like me. So bottom line is, for HF, if you can go for it, go for linear. Right? Because there is less resonance, less interference, and you do a better job. But it doesn't mean that SLPS won't work. I don't have a linear, I have a SLPS, it's working fine, it does create problems, but काम चल रहा है, right? Next, go back please. Rigs, we already discussed. Now it doesn't end there. Now if you have a low power rig, you will want to amplify it at one stage, some stage or the other. So you need an HF amplifier. You will need a standing wave ratio gauge, a meter which tells you what the SWR is. I'm not going into the details of SWR and all that. You will want an antenna tuner unit to be able to tune your antenna. So the list is actually endless. The wire that connects the radio to the antenna on the roof plays a huge role in how you can, the quality of your setup. So selecting the correct RG cable, whether you want RG213 or whatever, you need to speak to helpers, decide that there's a cost involved in it. That cost depends on where you are going to keep your shack. If you are keeping your shack on the top of your house, in a multi-story, let's say a 2-story or 3-story house, the expenditure is less because you can reach the antenna, the roof faster. If you want to keep your shack in the basement and then the antenna on the top, so you need to spend that much more. So these things you only learn when you take your plunge. So I thought I must share this. The antennas, of course, there's no end to the amount of money you can spend on this. Basically, there are two aspects which come up in this. Do you want an antenna which moves? When I say it moves, I am referring to an antenna which changes its elevation as well as its azimuth. If it's a Yagi antenna, and even if it's not a Yagi, if you have a simple dipole, even that can change. The orientation makes a difference in the direction and the countries you will get. So this does matter. There are people who have antennas which are not connected, but you can go to the roof and change the setting physically and then come back and sit on your rig. So that is also possible. As far as earthing is concerned, there are two types, RF ground as well as the electrical. Both need to be addressed. In my case, for almost a year I had neither. It worked. I have not killed myself as yet, but definitely when I set up my next shack, I will be going in for both these aspects. Finally, internet is very important because you hear a call sign, you definitely want to find out who he is and what is his QRZ ID and what is his QRZ page look like and so on, and you would like to send him a QSL card and so on. So therefore, internet is a must, and if you can connect your PC to the internet, especially the modern PCs, they have this facility, it makes it that much more easier. Next please. So this is what my ham shack today or even a year back used to look like. We had a power supply, 220 volts, it was connected to a micro Britex version 6 HF rig. It's about less than 10 watts. I had a Morse key since I do CW, I had a mic and I had an antenna, and that was it. I have done about 200-300 QSOs. I couldn't do more primarily because of my work, but otherwise that is what I was able to achieve. The next step when I do, next please, I added a 40 watt amp, I added a SWR meter and an antenna tuner unit. Performance improved. It was nice. People could hear me better. But like I said, there's no end to these things. So this schematic has been made by my helper. VU2YYE Costa. Atul was referring to him yesterday, and he's from Gurgaon. Again, an outstanding homebrew guy, and he understands the problems that non-techies like me face, and he can really dumb it down and explain to me in very simple terms. He karna kya. Next. This is a schematic of Atamu's shack, and you can see how complex it can get. He's also on air a lot, so he's got a ground tuner, he's got ground countercoils, he's got electrical ground, fuses. Those red boxes you see, they are the EMI suppressors, coaxial cables. He's got a laptop, USB connectivity, the works, a balloon, and this is really pretty much what any shack should be having at when you are at the final stages, when you are well experienced in this. I am deliberately not going into the prices because the range is very extremely the variation is too much. So I am not going into the costs, but I thought I must share at least what a shack should look like, what it should have, and the importance of the ground and the earth and so on. Next. As far as the UHF, VHF shack is concerned, it's pretty much the same. Like I mentioned, this works on FM. So modes is important to understand that some satellites work on FM, some satellites work on SSB, but in VHF. So there are a lot of exceptions in changing world with the VHF rig. Crossband repeater facility, many of these base stations do have, but remember you need a separate license to run a repeater. You can't just run a repeater on your own, you need a license for that. SSB in VHF, UHF is rare, but it exists. There are RS-40 satellite uses SSB on VHF. Base stations are not really required at our level. Handy works perfectly fine, and if you rig up a handy to a good antenna, it works as good as a base station. 5 watts, you can do a lot. But in case somebody wants a base station, you can definitely go in for it. It's good fun. Fabricate your own antennas as far as VHF is concerned. It's a good learning experience, not very technical. I found it extremely beneficial. Next please. So I have tried to conceptualize this thing, ham operators, triangle, or it's not a triangle really. So we are basically juggling with three things. We are juggling with the availability of money. We are juggling with the availability of the time and effort we can put. The same time and effort we are using to make money in our work, right? And the knowledge and initiative that we have for the hobby. If you have money, you can do with a little less of time and effort and a little less of knowledge. If you have a lot of time and effort, you can do with a little less of money and maybe a little between time and effort and knowledge you can manage it. If you have a lot of knowledge and inclination, you still need time and effort to convert that knowledge into something concrete. We would like to be in that yellow space in the center. Right? Next week. At the end of the day, it's great fun. Right? If you are here, if you are sitting here, then you must definitely, those who not apply for a license, apply for it. And those who have a license and want to set up your rigs, there's no better time than this. Thank you so much. I've finished. This is a common problem that we face. Go back. Once you're in the hobby, you're only thinking about your hobby.